Despite what the Bible claims, the God of the Old Testament wasn't the one and only true God. Yahweh wasn't originally the sole creator in ancient Israelite religion. He was part of a larger pantheon headed by El Elyon, or God Most High, operating alongside deities like Asherah, who was worshipped as Yahweh's wife, and believe it or not, Baal. Early Israelites didn't believe other gods didn't exist. They just pledged tribal allegiance to Yahweh above the others. After Jesus died, people began to realize the story of a good and loving God simply didn't add up. But instead of abandoning the religion, they invented a cosmic horror story to explain it away.
Tell them.
Yeah, tell them. Tell them.
What? Okay, apparently both God and Satan are telling me to remind you to subscribe. Don't forget to click like and comment below. That helps the YouTube gods see that this content is valuable for their sacrificial rituals. Now, let's get back to reality, or at least the reality the Demiurge created. After I realized the God of the Bible created both good and evil according to Isaiah 47:5, I had to somehow make sense of a world that no longer fit into the landscape of my existence. I was already studying the Apocrypha, and the Book of Thomas soon became my favorite, along with the Gospel of Mary. But as I was reading them, I began to see words that didn't make sense: archons, aeons, and demiurge. This was my introduction into a whole new religion referred to as Gnosticism, a belief system that put the mean and cruel God of the Old Testament to shame. It made sense, kind of, because it explained why the God of the Bible was so fickle and fierce, angry and vengeful.
I call bullshit.
But the new God that Plato created sounded far worse, and the story had no happy ending. It created a world of archons, or agents of the Demiurge. Those would replace angels and demons. The Demiurge would replace both God and Satan. Aeons were spirits created through the divine feminine and divine masculine. The creators of this religion believed Jesus was the autogene, sparked by divine light from the monad and his significant other, Barbello, who was the image of his first thought and gave glory to the virgin spirit. The Demiurge, who is named Jaldaboath, is the God of the Old Testament. I explained this in great detail in another video I'll link below. Now, this is a complex theory filled with more demons, angels, and a delightful cosmic entity who dabbles with herself to create another deity whom she aborts. Sophia creates an aeon without a partner and without the consent of the monad. She sees it's deformed and ugly, so she tosses it into the ether. However, she feels bad for it and creates an entire universe for it, the one we all live in today. She also gives him immense power and a throne to sit upon. She gives him the breath of life for Adam and Eve, thus us. The archons feed on our emotions. They rely on our pain and suffering to survive and thrive. That's why we're constantly told to suffer like Christ suffered. That's why blood sacrifice is essential to the Christ story. It relies on fear. Any blood sacrifice creates an aura of immense terror, and this becomes a sort of drug to these entities. They need you in perpetual fear and anxiety. They need you to look at the cross and feel shame and guilt. These are the very rituals used through demonic cults. They aren't worshiping Satan. They are feeding the entities. They are worshiping God, the same God you worship today. Let me back up so you can understand why I believe both gods aren't real. Because if we have proven that one true God wasn't always the case in the ancient world, we have to then assume that the Demiurge, who the Gnostics believed was the one true God, can't be real either. Because the Old Testament God was never real. He was created in a power move by King Josiah. King Josiah made a powerful political move around 622 BC. He was seeking absolute power over the masses, but he had a problem. The masses didn't believe in centralized authority. Each tribe had their own god or gods, and they worshiped in unique or disturbing ways. Some gods were loving and good, never requiring any blood sacrifice. But other gods instilled immense, great fear among the people, to the point where they would offer their own children in order for favor, land, and riches. And isn't it obvious? Of course, Josiah would choose that God as his one true God. It required fear and suffering while giving him absolute control. And Josiah would gather his scribes and demand they create a new God from the old ones, mold them all together, and make just one. And that's how Deuteronomy was created. Along with the one and only God, worship no other but me storyline. The same plot of the Demiurge. This all-knowing entity was an all-powerful, all-good God who causes, orders, and demands horrific violence. And by confusing the masses to believe this God was a good and kind father, they weren't allowed to question the contradictions. But then Jesus came along, and that whole idea of an evil and good God came to a close, or so it seemed. Jesus didn't come to sacrifice his life for your moral wrongdoings. He came to set you free from the gods and human authorities who created the moral wrongdoings. Jesus didn't denounce moral issues. He dealt with inner issues, the heart, the mind, and the collective. Unity, peace, harmony, and balance. You know, all the things Christians claim is New Age mumbo jumbo. They overlook his humanity and stamp suffering on it. They degraded his power and put a price tag on his life, a price you pay every single day, or Sundays if you're Catholic. He didn't fulfill the law because he didn't believe in the law. He broke them. He revealed that nothing catastrophic would happen if you did. He came to teach us that the law was inner awareness, not human authority. No one can tell you how to live your life. You were responsible for you and you alone. Don't judge, don't hate, don't condemn. Well, not without looking in the mirror first. It's why he hung out with the so-called sinners. He didn't hang with the religious folk because he knew they were fake. He knew they created the moral sins to keep the masses in fear of ever living outside of their rules that forced them to literally pay for them. Where did that money or sacrifice go? To them, of course. God didn't need it. Why would he? Because he liked the smell of a good barbecue?
I really do.
Oh, okay, but no. Because it fed the priests. It provided for their needs. Poor people who sinned paid a heavy price to keep the priests happy and content. That didn't start after Constantine. That began in the Old Testament. How to Manipulate the Masses to Give You Power and Their Goods 101. Constantine saw something worthwhile in that theory and added Jesus to his cause of power, just like Josiah did to the various gods of his time. It's all about the suffering. And Jesus didn't tell those whom he spent time with to suffer. He told them to look within and stop giving their power over to those who were using their guilt for profit. Thus, Jesus flipping the tables in the temple. Not because it was an abomination to God or his heavenly Father, but because it was stripping the life out of those who had nothing to give and forced them to give it anyway. I imagine that if Jesus walked the earth today, he would be hanging with the LGBTQ community. Oh, I know. Those who are shunned by those bearing his name, Christians. He would probably sit at a bar stool at the corner bar, sipping a cold one with the guy who just stole the tip left by the guy who once sat next to him. He would stay far, far away from the houses of worship. And they would find him at a gay bar and say, "What the hell, Jesus? We preached in your name, we healed the sick in your name, and you're sitting in the very place we condemn as unholy with vile, sinful people destined for hell." And Jesus would say, "I know you not."
I would.
Thanks, Sky Jesus. Plato. Yeah, right. Not Plato. Got it. In the 4th century BC, Plato was wrestling with a fundamental question, as most Greeks did. It was the same question many of us ask today, some bravely and openly, others only within, for fear of hell and damnation. That question was this:
If the divine source, or God, is a pure perfection and ultimate mind, how could it create a messy, imperfect, suffering physical world?
In typical Greek fashion, the argument went as follows. Heraclitus said, everything changes. Therefore, you can never truly know anything in the physical world because it never stays still long enough to be known. And Parmenides said, nothing changes. If something changes, it means it wasn't perfect to begin with. And then Plato concluded, damn, they're both right, but about different things. Plato realized he had to split reality down the middle to make sense of existence. In Parmenides' world of forms, there is an invisible, non-physical realm of eternal, perfect, unchangeable blueprints, like perfect geometry, pure truth, absolute beauty, and the ultimate concept of the good. And in Heraclitus's material world, the physical, sensory world we live in, it's full of dirt, decay, time, imperfection, and death. You can see Plato's dilemma. If the world of true divinity is completely non-physical, perfect, and changeless, how on earth did this messy, physical, imperfect universe come to exist? A perfect, unchangeable God couldn't get its hands dirty touching chaotic physical matter. That would ruin its perfection. Plato creates a dialogue called Timaeus and introduces the concept of the Demiurge, which means public worker or craftsman. In Plato's mind, the Demiurge wasn't an evil devil or an object of worship. It was a neutral, logical metaphor, a craftsman taking raw, chaotic matter and shaping it into the best possible physical world using the ideal forms as a blueprint. He builds on this premise of a carpenter who builds a wooden chair and asks, where did the chair come from? The carpenter didn't invent the concept of a chair. That's an eternal form or idea. The carpenter didn't create the wood out of thin air. The raw material already existed as raw, chaotic stuff. The carpenter simply looked at the perfect idea of a chair and carved the raw, chaotic wood to look as close to that perfect idea as possible. Thus, the Demiurge makes perfect sense, right?
No.
Yeah, you're right, it doesn't. But the Greeks knew what they meant.
Did they?
But here's how we can view this from Plato's point of view. He wanted the physical world to be beautiful and orderly. However, it's not. It has immense flaws, pain, disease, and of course, death and decay. And he didn't believe that was created by the Demiurge because he's evil or stupid, but rather because raw physical matter is inherently stubborn, heavy, and resistant to being perfectly shaped. Sounds like you. Sounds like me. Right?
Yes, exactly right.
They agree. So how then did the Demiurge become an evil, stupid god that the Gnostics believed? The authors of the Nag Hammadi texts were already denouncing the Old Testament God. They couldn't fathom such an entity being both wonderful and awful all at the same time. That didn't make sense, and it still doesn't.
Yes, it does.
No, it doesn't.
I agree with Satan on this one. The Apocryphon of John and the hypostasis of the archons debunk Yahweh, or the one true God. They realized a good, loving, peaceful God wouldn't order his people to commit atrocities or be vengeful upon anyone for any reason. And I agree. And while many Christians believe this is some new age wackadoo ideology, 1800 years ago, or only a few hundred years after Christ died, doesn't sound so new age to anyone but those who can't grasp reality. These followers of Christ weren't new age space cadets. They were recent converts. They were Jewish Greek Christians. They lived in a time when these theories were popular and meaningful. Meditation, higher consciousness, and achieving high frequencies were the norm. It was these people who kept Christ alive in his truest form until they were hunted down and destroyed. But like me, they questioned this idea of a God so vile, so cruel, that it seemed impossible to fathom Jesus had anything to do with it. And they knew he didn't. They were taught that he wasn't. It was only during Constantine's empire the two were smashed together. How awful it must be for Jesus to see himself not just combined with the very thing he came to discredit, but to be forged into a legal, spiritual prison entangled in hate, war, and division, the very things he preached against. In the 2nd and 3rd century AD, in the Greek Hellenized world across the Mediterranean, Gnostics began drafting their ideas of a new god and adopted Plato's theory of the Demiurge. They were individual, independent essays and secret gospels written across major intellectual hubs like Alexandria, Rome, and Antioch, all composed in Greek. They weren't created by Galilean fishermen. These texts were written by highly educated men and women, and to give it the allure of authenticity, they used the names of the original apostles: Thomas, Philip, James, and Mary Magdalene. They weren't a part of any church or movement. They were circulated privately among secret circles, private salons, and esoteric schools across Egypt and Roman Levant. They took local spiritual traditions, added Greek philosophy and mythology, and had hallucinatory mystical visions. And there you have the Nag Hammadi texts. The Sethians were an anonymous, deeply esoteric group who identified as the seed of Seth.
The third son of Adam.
Yeah, him. They were radical revisionists who took Jewish scripture, inverted it entirely, and laid out the darkest cosmic maps found at Nag Hammadi. These texts were dreamed up through Jewish wisdom literature, poetically describing wisdom as a woman, and named her Sophia. They also used Babylonian and Persian astrology to create the evil archons, the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, 7 gatekeepers, cosmic wardens who trap the human soul inside a grid of fate so you can never escape Earth. Then they took Plato's dream planet of non-physical ideas, named it Pleroma, or fullness, and populated it with divine heavenly light beings called aeons. They then rewrote Genesis to create a new fear-mongering religion and even claimed that Adam and Eve weren't disobeying God, but rather they had an awakening to escape the trap of the Demiurge. And the world, as the Bible tells it, isn't sacred or created by God, who saw it and claimed it was good.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
You two need to settle down. Instead, the world as we know it is an energetic battery farm ran by archons, harvesting human suffering. Sounds much better, right?
No.
Oh, no.
Well, at least you both can agree on something. So while trying to discredit the God of the Old Testament, they created an even worse God that keeps us here against our will, recycled over and over and over again. They believed they solved the problem of evil by making the physical world an absolute nightmare and claiming that only they held the secret exit passcode. And if you don't have this password, you'll be doomed for endless lives back on Earth, never ending, ever. Now, here's my issue with this whole story.
Oh, brother.
Shut up, both of you. This idea never solved the world is bad issue. Instead, it created a worse world. Gnostics believe, like Christians, that they hold the key to truth and revelation that only a select few will ever know. And they also want you to believe that the path to enlightenment and truth is through meditation and realizing your only purpose on earth is to feed a frenzy of archons. This is beyond the fear-mongering of Christianity. It's horrifyingly worse. At least with Christianity, you get redeemed. You get heaven. You get a savior. But not in Gnosticism. You're on your own, left to be recycled over and over, eaten alive with every moment of feeling one way or the other. Their entire key to escaping their world is to just be happy. Don't give the archons your energy. Yeah, I know, it's utter insanity. But the problem is this. Many people can't get in alignment with the God of the Bible theory. So they go looking for another God, not realizing they just fell for another worldly, man-made religion that feeds on your emotions, literally, to survive. Why give up one angry God for another one who never offers an ounce of freedom or rescue? At least the God of the Bible gives someone hope.
You're coming around.
No, I'm not. Both gods are equally awful, cruel, and vile. One creates evil and destruction, while the other feeds on the emotions of evil and destruction. You can't win. So why keep looking for a God when Jesus already told you that you are a God and the kingdom is within you? He is preaching about higher consciousness. He always did, which is how meditation got so ingrained in the Gnostic movement. We can achieve a higher level of existence, one of peace, joy, harmony, and balance. But it takes the collective thought and agreement to create it. Without the collective, you keep living under the curse. I want to share what I think about Jesus and the higher consciousness, but I'm going to leave that for another video. I can't say if what I believe is truth or not. All I can say is that it makes far more sense than either of these two mythologies we've been cursed with. So thanks again for sticking with me. Don't forget to subscribe and like. It really gets the angel and demons of YouTube off of my back and onto the right track. I'll see you next time.